AskReddit. Historians of Reddit, what is the biggest fuck you moment in history? Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them, one of them with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send a very fast working one to Moscow and I certainly won't have to send another. Tito to Joseph Stalin. The Battle of Alicia. Julius Caesar's attacking some Gauls in modern-day France, and they go hide in a castle on top of a hill. Caesar's army isn't big enough to take them all at once, and the Gauls have reinforcements coming, so a siege is impossible. So Caesar just builds a bigger castle around the one he's attacking. He literally just built 2 walls back to back in a ring around the castle. The first Gaul army was already too small to defeat Caesar, and his fortifications only gave him a greater advantage. The reinforcements were also unable to defeat Caesar's army now that he was behind several layers of spike pits and both earthen and wooden walls. Plus the Gauls inside had no way to communicate with the reinforcements outside, so they couldn't coordinate attacks. Both Gallic armies were defeated as they attacked Caesar's newly built fortifications, and Caesar emerged victorious. It's probably my favorite battle of all time. The construction and use of the Werwolf, supposedly the largest trebuchet ever built. When it was disassembled it would fill up 30 wagons. So anyways, King Edward I built this to siege a Scottish castle. But before it was even built the Scottish people tried to surrender. To which Edward responded with a prompt no. In actuality he responded with, "You do not deserve any grace, but must surrender to my will." In other words, I built this trebuchet over 40 days and I am most definitely going to use it, and proceeded to use the trebuchet anyways. The Second Defenestration of Prague. The Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia sends representatives to the Protestant city of Prague telling them to convert to Catholicism. The representatives get thrown out a window and allegedly landed in a pile of manure. Ferruccio Lamborghini was a rich man owning his company that built tractors. He talked to Ferrari about the imperfections of his car and how to improve them, and they basically laughed at a young tractor mechanic trying to tell them about sport cars, so he decided to start making luxury sport cars to compete with Ferrari, and thus, the rivalry was born. So I'd say the middle finger of this guy to Ferrari was pretty noticeable. So when France exiles Napoleon Bonaparte, the first time, they didn't think to change out military personnel. So he basically rolls up to the first French outpost he gets to, says sup and begins reassembling an army. By the time he gets to Paris, he's got enough forces that France is like, well, welcome back. Some URL. Olga of Kiev. When her husband died, the country that killed him assumed they'd just take over and force her into marriage. She straight up killed the dignitaries that were sent to tell her she had to marry, multiple times, in the most intense way possible. She then traveled to where her husband had been killed and basically burnt the place to the ground, again, in the most hardcore, amazing way. They made her a freaking saint. Worth the read on Wikipedia. This is already one of my favorite threads in Reddit history. Galvarino. Some URL, Chilean warrior who had both his hands cut off by the conquistadors for raising arms against the Spanish. Instead of letting himself serve as a message of helplessness in the face of the invaders, the crazy bastard strapped swords to his stumps and went on the warpath. This is more petty, but when Taft bragged to his friends via telegram about scaling a mountain on horseback, that it was a few thousand feet, clear weather, all in all not too difficult, his friend replied, "How is horse? More weight." Some URL. In the 1970s the small town of Vulcan, West Virginia asked for state funding to replace a bridge into town. The state legislature refused to grant Vulcan the funding they needed. Instead the town appealed to the Soviet Union for aid. After hearing about the request, the state legislature immediately granted over $1 million for the town to build a new bridge. If a small town in WV asking for Soviet funding in the middle of the Cold War isn't a big middle finger to the state government, then I don't know what is. A pirate known as Gene Leffitt had a bounty of $500 put on him by a governor. So he put a $5,000 bounty on the governor. My personal favorite, the beginning of the Battle of Stamford Bridge, in England, 1066. England's been invaded by a Norwegian army led by Harold Hardrada, King of Norway, and Tosta Godwinson, exiled English earl and estranged brother to the English king. They've already fought one battle, they've captured York. Things are looking good for them. They're chilling, enjoying their success, waiting at Stamford Bridge for the hostages they demanded. It's a hot day. They're not expecting any trouble. But wait, an English army shows up. That's practically impossible. The Battle of Stamford had taken place only 5 days ago, and the Norwegians had completely routed the forces of the Northern Earls. The rest of the English army was known to be in the south, awaiting a Norman invasion. Turns out the English had ridden all the way up north in 4 days. The Norwegians were, understandably, a bit unhappy. They form into a circle. They don't have their armor with them, it's at the ships. It's too hot to be hanging around in mail. They've got helmets and shields and weaponry, and that's it. The English send a rider to negotiate. He tells Tostig that his brother the king is willing to offer him his earldom back and part of the rule of England if he gives up now. Tostig asks what his buddy Harold Hardrada gets for his trouble. 6 feet of English ground, or as much more as he needs, being taller than other men. Tostig says they're done here. The rider rides away. Harold Hardrada asks who the dude was, because if it had been him talking, he'd have just killed the bastard there. Tostig says, "Oh, that's my brother. That's Harold Godwinson, the king." Harold Godwinson rode up to an enemy army personally and told the King of Norway, known to be a great warrior and general, that all he'd get from this invasion was a grave. Battle commences. Norwegians lose. Tostig and Harold Hardrada both die. Huge bloody mess. English army is crippled. And then 3 days later the Normans land in the south. Harold is fucked. He still marches his army back, gathers as much force as he can, and engages 3 weeks later. He's killed at Hastings. Normans conquer England. Basically a very personal fuck you moment that snowballed quite intensely. Edit, because a lot of people are asking, yes, this was the battle with the legendary berserker at the bridge. No, it probably didn't actually happen. The story appears hundreds of years later and is very inconsistent. Also, there might not have been an actual bridge there at the time. Napoleon invited his brother-in-law to speak with him before his coronation as emperor to remind the brother-in-law that he objected to Napoleon marrying Josephine because Napoleon would amount to nothing. Operation Paul Bunyan. Some URL. Here's the TLDR if you don't want to read the Wikipedia article. It's 1976. Some Americans at the Korean DMZ are cutting down a tree that obscures their vision to the North Korean side. A couple of North Koreans come out and kill a few Americans with their own axe. The Americans and South Koreans come back with such a massive show of force it's not even funny. Bombers, jet planes, 27 helicopters, a full aircraft carrier moved off the coast. Thousands of troops, troop carriers, commandos, all just to send in a squad of army engineers with chainsaws to cut down that goddamn tree. I would highly recommend giving the forces used part of the Wikipedia article a read. It's riveting and hilarious. Edit, thanks for the silver, fellow appreciator of American awesomeness. Who knew my top comment would be about the most expensive tree cutting of all time? This requires some background. The Spartans were famously blunt. They were trained to get to the point when speaking, instead of using artsy and beautiful language that would have been common at the time, by being bitten on the thumb if they became long-winded. Now to the meat. Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, sent the Spartans a letter saying, "Would you like me to enter your land as friend of foe?" The Spartans responded with one word. Neither. Philip was irate. He then sent another long-winded message. "If once I enter into your territories, I will destroy ye all, never to rise again." The Spartans then sent back one word. If. It was like putting your head in a lion's mouth, and I love it. Genghis Khan to Shah ad-Din. After the Coramids plundered one of Genghis Khan's caravans, killed his people, and took his shit, he thought to take the diplomatic approach and send 2 envoys and an interpreter. Shah ad-Din decided to be a dumbass about it. He shaved the heads of the envoys to shame them and sent them back with the head of the interpreter. Mr. Khan was kinda pissed, so he marched 200,000 of his boys and fucking annihilated their town with only 1/4 of that number even able to fight back. He was so pissed at the Shah that he had the rivers keeping the surrounding villages alive fully diverted, so that he would literally wipe Ala ad-Din's birthplace off the map and make it so that it was like he never existed. No one would settle there or live there ever again. No one would be there to remember his enemy who had disrespected him. Not even the dogs or cats would be spared, said Genghis Khan. French surrender in World War II. Hitler dictates that the French capitulation take place at Compiègne, a forest north of Paris. This is the same spot where 22 years earlier the Germans had signed the armistice ending World War I. Hitler intends to disgrace the French and avenge the German defeat. To further deepen the humiliation, he orders that the signing ceremony take place in the same railroad car that hosted the earlier surrender. The armistice is signed on June 22. Under its terms, 2/3 of France is to be occupied by the Germans. The French army is to be disbanded. In addition, France must bear the cost of the German invasion. On the crowning of King Henry VII, he backdated his own reign to before the date of the Battle of Bosworth, meaning anyone who was loyal to him now but had shown any sign of opposition at Bosworth was now a traitor and an enemy to the realm. Justice served. Khosrow Anushirawan was a Shah of Iran in the 500s AS. He took over a town, Antioch, that used to belong to the Byzantine Empire, ran by Emperor Justinian. But before he burned it to the ground, he had architects and a bunch of other people go through and record exactly what the city and its buildings looked like. He then built a new town that looked exactly the same and named it Way Antioch Khosrow, which translates roughly to Khosrow's better version of Antioch. And that's not even all of the ways Khosrow trolled Justinian. I recommend watching Extra Credits series on this dude, it's nuts. Edit, Jesus Christ people, I get it, it's CE, not ACE. The Siege of Tyre. Some URL. Basically Alexander the Great was unable to capture the city because it was on an island, so he made it into a peninsula to be able to properly attack. Greater than it is said that Alexander was so enraged at the Tyrians' defense of their city and the loss of his men that he destroyed half the city. That was a pretty big fuck you to Tyre, and I love this comic representation. Some URL of the events by Flork of Cows. Julius Caesar's death. At least he died surrounded by friends. I would say the moment that Rollo swore allegiance to the French king. The bishop's presence suggested that Rollo kiss the king's foot, as a sign of submission. It was probably an idea intended to humiliate Rollo, and was not taken very well. After some discussion, it was agreed that one of Rollo's men would do it. However, the person chosen lifted the king's foot, and, without bending down, brought it up to his mouth. Not surprisingly, the king fell over, amid general laughter in the court. Following this amusing scene, the king and his men swore to honor the concession to Rollo. Some URL. Not the biggest, probably, but the first that came to mind. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's response to the Nazi demand that Bastogne surrender. Nuts, not the biggest, but definitely one to note. In 1966, Charles de Gaulle ordered all U.S. troops out of France, as he said the country was leaving NATO. LBJ's first words were to his Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, "Ask him about the cemeteries, Dean." When Dean Rusk mentioned whether or not the 60,000 plus U.S. soldiers buried in France were to be removed, de Gaulle simply stood up and left the room, embarrassed. The reply of the Zaporozhian Cossacks is the best response to a demand for surrender, ever. In response to requests by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire to desist attacks and submit. Zaporozhian Cossacks to the Turkish Sultan. O Sultan, Turkish devil and damned devil's kith and kin, secretary to Lucifer himself. What the devil kind of knight art thou, that canst not slay a hedgehog with your naked ass? The devil shits, and your army eats. Thou shalt not, thou son of a whore, make subjects of Christian sons. We have no fear of your army. By land and by sea we will battle with thee, fuck thy mother. Thou Babylonian scullion, Macedonian wheelwright, brewer of Jerusalem, goat fucker of Alexandria, swineherd of Greater and Lesser Egypt, pig of Armenia, Podolian thief, catamite of Tartary, hangman of Communets, and fool of all the world and underworld, an idiot before God, grandson of the serpent, and the crick in our dick. Pig's snout, mare's ass, slaughterhouse cur, unchristened brow. Screw thine own mother. So the Zaporozhians declare, you low life. You won't even be hurting pigs for the Christians. Now we'll conclude, for we don't know the date and don't own a calendar, the moon's in the sky, the year with the Lord, the day's the same over here as it is over there, for this kiss our ass. Koshu v Ottoman Ivan Sirko, with the whole Zaporozhian host. Edit, 7 years in and my first gold. Neat. When Germanic tribes invaded Britain after the Romans left, they named the native Celts Welsk, meaning foreigner, even though they themselves were the foreigners. That later became the word Welsh, which the English promptly adopted for phrases like Welch on a bet. TL, Doctor, all of history has been one giant etymological middle finger to the Welsh. When Alcibiades fucked the Spartan king's wife, then fled to Persia, became a high command and made it back to Athens where he once started as a politicane and became one again, he said fuck you to Athens, he betrayed them, Sparta and Persia and got away with it because he looked so damn good. British prisoner of war in Nazi Germany stitches a quilt. The Nazis put it out for show. Hidden in Morse code stitched in were the words fuck Hitler and God save the Queen. Some URL. Edit God save the King. I think I just had the Queen song stuck in my head. Henry VIII divorcing Catherine of Aragon. This is like the opposite of what you're asking for because it could have been a big fuck you but it went another way. Abraham Lincoln, while still a largely unknown frontier lawyer, was asked to assist in a law case by some bigwigs out in the East because the trial was going to be held in Springfield and they wanted a local lawyer on the team. Well, the location of the trial got moved but the bigwig lawyers never told Lincoln they didn't need him anymore. He worked really hard on some arguments and showed up to the trial, which was now in Ohio or something. The bigwig lawyers were pretty rude to him when he showed up and didn't use any of his arguments and didn't allow him to participate. They did eventually send him a check for payment but Abe sent it back. They did send it back writing enough to get Abe to deposit the check. When Abe became president he eventually asked the head lawyer of the bigwigs in this case, Edwin Stanton, to be his Secretary of War. Edwin Stanton grew to truly love Abraham Lincoln and was a very effective Secretary of War. Abe could have remembered the snub from earlier in his career and refused to have anything to do with Stanton, but Abe was never truly offended and saw Stanton as a good person to have in his cabinet. Soviets invading Poland in 1939, during the conquest of Constantinople, now Istanbul, when Sultan Mehmed had his ships carried on oily stakes by thousands of men to get past the big chain that prevents ships to enter Bosphorus. Several of them. My favorite is when Deng Xiaoping ordered the Chi Com army to invade Vietnam in order to teach them a lesson about the South China Sea dispute. The Chinese rolled across the border and were like, hey, where's everyone? Looks like they didn't even field an army when they started getting hit with guerrilla types of attacks. The Chinese commies were supposed to mop the floor, they ended up incurring way more casualties than they anticipated and basically retreated back to China after 1 month and declared victory. Couldn't get a solid body blow on the Vietnamese army. In AD 37 the new Roman Emperor Gaius, better known by the nickname Caligula, built a bridge across the sea. It stretched 3 miles across the deep blue waters of the Bay of Naples at ancient Rome's most fashionable seaside resort of Baiae. But Caligula's was no ordinary bridge. It was a temporary, floating structure built on wooden pontoons, a costly and impressive feat of engineering. It served a single purpose before being dismantled. On a day of boiling heat watched by crowds of spectators, Caligula rode across the bridge. His armor glinted in the sunlight, for the 24-year-old emperor had dressed himself in the golden breastplate of the legendary Greek hero Alexander the Great. On the following day Caligula made the journey in reverse, this time riding in a chariot, followed by soldiers of his personal guard. It was a pointless piece of showmanship, lost on the majority of the crowd, several of whom fell drunkenly to their deaths in the sea after 2 days partying. One historian claimed Caligula pulled the stunt to disprove a prophecy that he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. In 1941 the U.S. requested Panama grant a 999-year-long lease to build over 100 military bases within their country. The Panama government asked for compensation in return which the U.S. felt was too high. The U.S. responded by overthrowing their government by orchestrating a coup. They then signed an agreement with the new one. On 30th September 1938, a treaty called Munich Agreement was signed, causing Germany's annexation of Sudetenland, a region of western Czechoslovakia, where many German people lived. It was signed by leaders of UK, France, Italy, and Germany. UK and France signed it, because Hitler promised that he won't go to war if he got the Sudetenland. We all know how that turned out. But that's not all. The biggest fuck you to Czechoslovakia was that they weren't invited to the meeting. Yes, they weren't invited to the meeting about their own region. Also, France was an ally of Czechoslovakia at the time. So yeah, thanks for support, France. Sorry for any mistakes, English is not my first language. Also, my first Reddit post. 1898 Philippine independence. It was not a real independence, It's just the US buying Spain's property and fucks it up his own way. This, some URL, was played in besieged Leningrad. And it was broadcasted on radio, so Nazi soldiers could hear it. Imagine hearing "fuck you" from a city that you thought was already dead. Hitler committing suicide underground, the burning of the Library of Alexandria. I'm not an historian, but I know this World War I fact. In 1918 during the Battle of Villers-Bretonneux, Major James Robertson made a plan to steal a German tank stuck in no man's land. There was no point in getting it, because it was dangerous going out there and the tank wasn't a threat to anyone. Not giving fuck about that, he grouped with 12 other men to retrieve the tank, under machine gun fire and inside mustard gas, just to say to the German army, "Fuck you, look what we got here." Thanks to him and the other men, today that tank is the only original World War I tank we have, and it's called Mephisto. When Otto von Bismarck was about 50, he was walking down a street when a man ran up to him and shot him 5 times. Otto then turned around and began to beat the absolute shit out of him until some armed guards come to help him. When they inspected Otto for wounds, they found that all 5 hit, but they all either just grazed him or bounced off his ribs. Literally the Iron Chancellor, upon receiving his certificate as the first black PhD in Harvard history, W.E.B. Du Bois allegedly remarked that the honor, "I assure you, was all Harvard's." After the Restoration, the English dug up the body of Oliver Cromwell and hung, drawn and quartered the body, sticking the head on London Bridge. "If we get into your city we will burn it to the group." If Winter War between Finland, population 3 million, and Soviet Union, population 300 million. Lasted 105 days. Strength, Finland, 300,000 to 340,000 soldiers, 32 tanks, 114 aircraft. Strength, USSR, 425,000 to 760,000 soldiers, 2,514 to 6,541 tanks, 3,880 aircraft. Casualties and losses. Finland 25,904 dead or missing, 43,557 wounded, 800 to 1,100 captured, 20 to 30 tanks, 62 aircraft, 70,000 total casualties. USSR 126,875 to 167,976 dead or missing, 188,671 to 207,538 wounded or sick, including at least 61,506 sick or frostbitten, 5,572 captured, 1,200 to 3,543 tanks, 261 to 515 aircraft. 321,000 to 381,000 total casualties. Andrew Jackson was walking around Washington, D.C. when an assassin tried to kill him with 2 pistols. Both pistols misfired, and Jackson proceeded to beat the would-be killer within an inch of his life with his cane. In the late 1980s, Nintendo and Sony developed a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo. Nintendo then pulled out of the partnership and opted to work with Philips instead and released the CDI. This move was highly frowned upon because Nintendo had decided to ditch a fellow Japanese company over a foreign one. So Sony picked up the pieces of the project and tried to partner with Sega. The board of directors turned the idea down, saying that's a stupid idea. Sony doesn't know how to make hardware. They don't know how to make software either. Why would we want to do this? At the end, Sony released a game system by the name of PlayStation in 1994 to compete with the Nintendo 64 and outsold their former partners nearly 3-1. Plus it marked the first time that Nintendo wasn't top dog since they released the NES. Caesar at Alicia. The Gauls were like, send the women and kids, they'll become slaves but they won't die of starvation, and Caesar was like, fuck you, go back and die. The first cell phone. The first call ever made from a cell phone was to a competitor's landline. Big Dick Energy, God to the World from 1914 to 1918. Archduke Ferdinand narrowly escapes assassination and, a few hours later, takes wrong turn and has his car break down directly in front of the assassin's lair and is killed, triggering World War I. Millions die. The global order is shattered. And, just as peace is finally declared, one of the worst epidemics in human history breaks out and travels the world, with the returning troops killing untold millions more. Danes attacking/raiding Athelred after he just paid them not to. When Alexander the Great cut the Gordian knot, instead of untying it. Construction of the Lion's Mound Monument in Waterloo after Napoleon's defeat at the hands of the Allies. The giant statue was showing its ass to England while roaring at France. At the Nuremberg fairgrounds, when you stand where Hitler delivered his fiery speeches, you look out and there's now an American football field. Well, I think it changes seasonally, but it was the fall when I was there last. All the Nazi symbols were blown up at once after the Americans invaded. To the German commander. Nuts. Sparta to Philip II. Philip Dodo Sparta that if he marches into Sparta he will raze the land, burn the crops, rape the women, and just destroy the city. Sparta replies back with a single word. If. Finns calling petrol bottles as Molotov cocktails after Molotov said the bombers over Finland dropped bread baskets, in reality bombs, so Finns named a drink to go down with the bread. The Achaemenid Empire had trouble conquering the Egypt in the early part of their war, so they decided to use the very embodiment of their holy figure against them. They literally had soldiers carry cats with them and painted cat heads on their shields so the Egypts couldn't fight back due to their beliefs and surrendered. They literally pulled a "your god is our front line." This is known as the Battle of Pelusium. A lot of what Hannibal did was a big fu. Crossing the Alps during winter, surrounding and defeating a larger army in the Battle of Cannae. The Norwegian king, Olaf Tryggvason, some URL, killed another Viking chief/king who refused Christianity by sticking a tube down his throat, smashing a snake into the fucking tube and lighting the end on fire so the snake tunneled out of the dude's back. What a fucking power move. Edit. It was not Saint Olaf, but King Olaf Tryggvason. And also, here's the guy that had the snake stuffed down his throat. Some URL. The Battle of Cowpens during the Revolutionary War. A U.S. commander was given a large number of militiamen who in battle were known to fall back before being given orders. The British, knowing that colonial regulars would stand ground and the militia wouldn't, would often press attacks to bring their numbers and weapons to great effect. And so this U.S. commander decided to make a stand at a place where his army couldn't retreat, at a place called Cowpens. The specific position was basically a small peninsula that was surrounded by a big river that you couldn't reasonably cross if say you were trying to evade gunfire. Once situated, the commander set his troops up in 3 lines. The militiamen up front where they would fire first, the more experienced guys in the second wave firing second, and the hardened veterans in the third rank. When the British came they tried several times to dislodge the colonial army, but they were repulsed every time. This commander literally told his troops to say fuck you to their fear of the British, and it worked. When an Italian city-state declared war and invaded another city-state because of a bucket, pretty sure they lost as well. I will always think of a story of Andrew Jackson that a history professor told me. Jackson married a woman that was divorced, which was bad already, but she wasn't actually divorced from her last husband. Whenever Jackson heard of people talking badly on him or his wife, he would challenge them to a duel. Yes, take 10 paces and shoot kind of duel. One day he heard of a man that was basically a pro at shooting and that man was talking mad shit, so Jackson challenged him to a duel because he will duel anybody. Once the duel started, they went to shoot and Jackson just dropped his gun because he knew that he didn't have the skill of his opponent. The other man shot. And missed. So Andrew Jackson picked up his gun, walked up to his opponent, and shot him in the forehead. The only thing I learned from that class. Genghis Khan hurling plague-ridden corpses over his enemies' walls. Olga of Kiev. Edit. To elaborate, here is a part of the article on Olga. TLDR at the bottom. Some URL. The Dravians sent 20 of their best men to try and persuade Olga to marry the living symbol of her husband's murder. Telling them to wait in their boat, she had a ditch dug and next morning had the emissaries buried alive. Rather than just leave it at this, a pretty definitive refusal if ever there was one, she sent word back to Prince Mal that she would accept his proposal, but only if the Dravians sent a part of their great and good to accompany her back to their territory. After all, it was important that the proud Kievan Rus see just how important this matchmaking was. Her would-be suitor obliged, sending a party of their chieftains to collect her. Extending a suitably grand welcome, she invited the visitors to wash up in her bathhouse and then locking the doors, burn the entire company alive. Olga hatched a plan to do away with the rest of them altogether and announcing that she would be soon arriving at the Dravian capital of Iskorosin and asked for them to arrange a funeral feast where they could mourn over her husband's death and at the very city. Despite the not having heard from either of the missions they dispatched to Olga's court, the Dravians set about preparing the feast and after drinking themselves insensible on mead, Olga's soldiers put 5,000 of them to the sword. Now Olga gave to each soldier in her army a pigeon or a sparrow, and ordered them to attach by thread to each pigeon and sparrow a piece of sulfur bound with small pieces of cloth. When night fell, Olga bade her soldiers release the pigeons and the sparrows. So the birds flew to their nests, the pigeons to the cotes, and the sparrows under the eaves. The dovecotes, the coops, the porches, and the haymows were set on fire. TLDR, basically, she buried 20 men of a people called Drevians alive, then burned a bunch of Drevians in a building, then made her soldiers kill 5,000 more of the Drevians and then burned the rest of the people's homes. When Genghis Khan wiped out Khamid Empire, modern-day Iran, because they messed up with his souls, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, smaller scale here, shout out to /r/CFB. It's Saturday, October 23, 2004. 2. Gridiron, football teams, the Iowa Hawkeyes and the Penn State Nittany Lions, are nearing the end of a brutal game. Whereas the rest of the football world is getting high-flying offenses, this is a defensive war. Iowa is up 6-2, which is already an ugly score. Penn State's defense scored the first points early in the first quarter, a safety, where the ball is downed and slashed behind the offense's own end zone. Iowa stormed back in the first half with a pair of 27-yard field goals, but the second half of the game has been scoreless. And with 4th and long in their own part of the field, Iowa coach Kirk Ferentz has a decision. The most traditional choice, and the one Ferentz is most known for, is to punt, giving the other team the ball at about midfield. It's all right, but it's not impossible for Penn State to march down, kick a field goal, and set up for a second score. He could also try to make a first down, but given the offense, it's not looking good that he would make it, and that would give Penn State the ball much closer. He takes a third option, the FU safety. The team lines up to punt, but the punter doesn't kick the ball. He scrambles around the goal line and end zone until chased out by the Penn State defense. Penn State scores 2 more points and gets the ball back, but far on their own side of the field. In doing so, Ferentz basically dares Penn State to score anything. Oh, and this isn't terribly late in the fourth quarter. There's still 8 minutes on the clock. But the Iowa defense gets it done, and the score stands 6-4. I'm well done on this side. Turn me over. Some URL. St. Lawrence. This guy. Some URL, who basically showed a rolling wagon of fuck yous to the Prussians. When Trump won the presidency and thousands of liberals cried like babies, maybe in recent history Trump winning the election. All of Wall Street against him, 97% of funds going to Hillary, all of the foreign countries against him, many Republicans, supporting illegals for years, against him, most of the media against him. With the strength of the people, God, and personality at his side, Donald Trump destroying the libs and the propagandizing media in 2016, Obama goes on Kimmel to read a mean tweet from Trump. Obama says Trump will never be president. MSM says same thing. Trashes Trump every chance they get. Trump becomes president, destroys Obama's legacy and exposes fake news. MAGA, deleted, the Trump election. After a long time of ad hominems being the main debate tactic by the left and the Democratic Party abandoning the working class to play identity politics, Trump being elected was possibly the biggest fuck you in political history, as Michael Moore said. Some URL. Like him or not, he made a lot of ignored people feel like they mattered, when he said things that are on most people's mind but other candidates won't say it because of the PC police. His supporters being called a basket of deplorables and racist for wanting a secure border sure as shit didn't help, especially when they called all of his black supporters Uncle Toms. Seeing as the Democratic Party now talks about health care for illegal immigrants, social media banning conservative voices, and the MSM doubling down and calling everyone a racist since 2020 would be a bigger fuck you. Peas, downvoting this won't make it go away. BTW. I'd kif this counts but Galileos. Some URL. Middle. Some URL. Finger. Some URL. When the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor, I really think the 2016 election of Donald Trump was one of the biggest FU moments in history. It has been 3 years, and as someone who gave my vote to Trump on principle, entirely convinced he would not win but deserved it, every single say I wake up has been surreal. Imagine being a member of the winning side of this war? I feel like it isn't something considered often. Every morning I wake up to a Reddit feed and news feed filled with hate for me and hate for the person and ideas I support. Frothing at the mouth, livid irrational hate. You would think the whole world is angry, but that is not true. There is an entire portion of the world that is not angry at all and that wakes up every day like holy shit, we are winning. Every single time I check Donald Trump's Twitter, it is beyond anything I could have ever imagined. It has actually renewed my faith in the United States, the value of our freedoms and the capacity to change our fates against all odds. Think about that. There are people who get to wake up every day like fuck yeah, everything is going as planned. Fuck yeah, life is good. Fuck yeah, logic is winning. Every day and all over the place we get to see the over-the-top crying, whining, bitter insecurity that is the evidence of our win. Every single day Trump is president is a day we are living our best life. The election of Donald Trump. The 2016 election was supposed to be more of a coronation than anything. Longtime DNC sufferer, Hillary Clinton, stayed by her husband's side through numerous scandals. For the good of the party, she stepped aside when a popular black guy came out of nowhere and became president for another 8 years. 2016 was supposed to be Hillary Clinton collecting her due. It was owed to her. And then she got curb stomped by an orange billionaire playboy with goofy hair. And every day since, for going on 4 years, there has been a constant screech from the media and liberal elite across the country. Oil. Trump's election. After the Spanish Inquisition, Spain received no help from other kingdoms when the Moors invaded and held Spain captive for many centuries. Oh, the Moors is another term for Muslims. I am not a historian. Christ, motherfuckers don't break time, too often. Deleted. Electing Trump. The globalist and foreign interested invested billions into establishing the Uni-Party in America, controlling our schools, controlling 95% of our media, etc. 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 Americans didn't want any of that fake news shit, and now we have an incredible economy instead of socialism in the Second Depression. The US dropping 2 nukes in Japan. Honestly, it's gotta be when the Russians got Donald Trump elected. The current fuckhead we have as the president, the US greater than. Can you fucking stop reposting this question every 6 months? Some URL. Some URL. Some URL. Some URL. Palestine, Palestinian territories, not being a country after World War II. Kurds not getting a country after helping the US and its allies fight both Iraq and Syria. The spread of Christianity. We have literacy and can write things down, but fuck your entire illiterate culture. Make room for Jesus by forgetting everything you previously spread by word of mouth and make a historian's life miserable about 2,000 years from now in the future when he tries to piece the remains together. When my friend lost in Minecraft PvP, he went into creative and destroyed my Minecraft house and killed my dog. Can't kill the North American native populations outright? Start a cultural genocide to deprive their children of their heritage in an attempt to assimilate them. Watching America ignore the rise of Trumpist fascism. November 8, 2016. Donald Trump. When Daenerys Targaryen used her dragon to straight-up demolish King's Landing after it had surrendered. A Reddit historian is just like an Instagram model. Removed. A president named Trump. When black people stole the N-word. When Obama mocked Trump at that dinner, then Trump became president. When Donald Trump upset the establishment by being the first president who wasn't predetermined. There are way too many URLs in this text, I will skip this part. The American Revolution. Republicans refuse to even hold hearings for a Supreme Court nominee made by a duly elected and sitting president of the United States. Shit posters memeing Donald Trump into office. Fart. The nomination of Hillary Clinton. 2016 American election. The 2016 United States election. When Trump won the election of 2016 via the Electoral College. That was the biggest fuck you to democracy and the people of the United States. Now you can't go into Walmart as a brown person because some Trumper will blast you with an assault rifle. But this is fine, everything's fine.